My name is Dennis Hartley, and I was 57 years old the October. My daughter told me there was no seat for me at her Thanksgiving table. One text. That's all it was. I was in the driveway brushing the first wet snow of the season off my truck before the morning run when my phone buzzed. My daughter's name on the screen. I still remember thinking it was something good. Maybe she was asking what to bring to dinner. Maybe my grandson wanted to talk. It wasn't that. Dad, we're keeping it small this year. Just my husband's family. I hope you understand. I read it twice, then a third time, the way you do when words won't organize themselves into sense. I understood every word separately. Together they made something I wasn't prepared for. I set the phone on the roof of the truck and finished brushing the snow off the windshield. Old habit, finished the job. Then I stood in the driveway in my work jacket, the October cold already coming off the boreal, and I did the math. Thanksgiving. My daughter, her husband's family, and no seat for me anywhere in that equation. Before I take you back to the beginning, I want to ask you something. Take a second and like this video, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and what time it is there. I want to know who's keeping me company right now, because I'm going to need you with me for what comes next. What comes next is this. 4 days after that text, somewhere over the Maritimes, my phone showed 11 missed calls from the same daughter who'd just locked the door. I need you to understand who I was before any of that. Before the door, before the text, before my son-in-law. My wife passed 13 years ago. Ovarian cancer. She went from a hard cough in January to gone by March break. And that kind of speed doesn't leave you time to prepare. My daughter was 19. We'd just paid the first semester of her nursing program. My son, her older brother, was working rig in Fort McMurray and came home for the service and had to leave again in a week because the bills don't stop coming because your mother is dead. I'm an electrician. Journeyman, 32 years. I ran my own small outfit for the last 20 of those. Residential and light commercial, just me and 2 other guys at peak. Northern Ontario doesn't make you rich. It makes you steady if you work and broke if you don't. After my wife passed, I worked. Not because I was running from the grief, though maybe some of that too, but because a 19-year-old girl needed tuition and textbooks, and someone to drive 4 hours to Sudbury General on a Tuesday when she had a bad week, and didn't say so, but I could hear it in her voice. I did that twice. Just showed up. Knocked on her residence door with a bag from Tim Hortons, and we sat in the parking lot in my truck with the heat running, and she cried, and I didn't say anything useful. Just handed over the large double-double and let her get it out. That was the most helpful thing I knew how to do. I wasn't a perfect father. I was always better at showing up than at talking. My wife had been the one who knew what to say. I was the one who fixed the things that broke and drove the distances, and sat in the uncomfortable chairs and clapped when clapping was needed. My daughter played hockey until she was 16. I was there for every game, in every cold arena from Timmins to North Bay, in my work parka with the thermal liner, still smelling of wire insulation and a long day. I was never the father who cheered loud, but I was always the one in the stands. She met my son-in-law in her second year of nursing in Ottawa. He was in commercial real estate, a partner at a firm that had just expanded from Toronto. When she brought him home to meet me that first Thanksgiving, back when there was still a me at her Thanksgiving, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I always do. He had a good handshake, I'll say that. He'd practiced it. The first thing he did was look around my house, the way a man looks at something he's deciding whether to renovate or tear down. Cozy, he said. Very authentic, Dennis. Like cozy was a polite word for something else. He asked what I did. I told him. Trades, he said, nodding slowly, as if he were filing the information correctly. People underestimate that world. People, as if he'd never met one. He never called me Dad, not once in 5 years. Always Dennis, even when my daughter called me Dad 2 words earlier in the same sentence. I noticed. I let it go. That first Thanksgiving after they married, my daughter hosted. Fine. I brought a decent Niagara cab franc and sat where I was pointed and tried to find a way into the conversation. His partners from the office were there, a couple from their building. The talk was about property values and a ski trip to Tremblant. I'm not much for ski talk. I ate the turkey, which was good, and I drove the 4 hours back to Sudbury that night. The second year I got a text invitation 3 days later than everyone else. I found out later, because my daughter mentioned it by accident, and then went quiet in a way that told me she hadn't meant to. Then my grandson came. Emmett. 7 years old now, all gap-toothed smiles and opinions about everything. He loved hockey the way my daughter had, passionately and with no talent whatsoever, which made him perfect to watch. When he was little, he used to sit in my workshop and hand me tools and ask questions that had no good answers. "Grandpa, why is electricity invisible?" I told him it wasn't, it was just fast. He thought about that for a long time. Last spring, before everything, I promised him I'd teach him to skate properly. Not just the arena stuff his dad signed him up for, but real skating, on the lake, when it froze solid the way I'd learned. I told him we'd find a good stretch of ice and skate until our ankles gave out, and then drink hot chocolate until we thawed. He said, "Promise?" I said, "I keep my promises." That was before the visits started getting cancelled. My son-in-law always had reasons, calm and reasonable ones. My grandson has a cold. He had a birthday party with classmates. He had a hockey camp in Kingston. I'd drive down from Sudbury, 4 hours, and get a text an hour into the drive saying maybe next weekend was better. I stopped being surprised by the texts. I started being surprised when they didn't come. I knew what was happening. I wasn't naive. I just kept giving the benefit of the doubt because the alternative was admitting that the man my daughter married had decided I was inconvenient and was quietly, politely, efficiently removing me from the picture. He did it with language. That was his tool. "We're really focused on Emmett's routine right now, Dennis. My daughter just needs some space to find her own parenting rhythm. We want to make sure our family unit has room to breathe." Every sentence was reasonable. Every sentence left me a little further from the door. The word boundaries became something he wielded the way other men use their size. Quietly. So you can't point at it. The year before the Thanksgiving text, I found out about my grandson's end-of-season hockey party through a photo my daughter posted online. There he was, cake and teammates, and my son-in-law in a Sens jersey, and there I wasn't. When I asked my daughter about it, she said it was just a small thing. Just the team families. I said I was family. She went quiet, the way she always went quiet when she didn't have an answer she could say out loud. Christmas cards started arriving from their house with the 4 of them on it. My daughter, my son-in-law, my grandson, and the new baby. And I'd stand at the kitchen counter, holding them, looking for myself somewhere in the warmth of that photo and not finding anything. I was a man who'd driven 10,000 kilometers to be present in my daughter's life. Now I was getting a card. I kept telling myself, don't be a burden. Don't be the father who complains. Keep the peace. Fathers who make noise become obstacles, and I would not be an obstacle. Whatever's easiest, sweetheart. That's fine. I said that so many times it stopped meaning anything at all. The morning she texted me about Thanksgiving, I stood in the driveway for a long time. Then I went inside and made a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table and asked myself the question I'd been avoiding for 3 years. When exactly had I become optional? I can tell you when it started. It started when my son-in-law began using the word boundaries as a weapon. When he started framing every inch of access to my own daughter and my own grandchildren as something to be managed for the good of the family. The family he'd appointed himself the head of. I gave him every inch he asked for because I thought that was what love looked like. I know better now. What I called grace, he called confirmation that I could be moved. I typed back one word, why. 3 dots appeared. My chest did something foolish and hopeful. Then the dots vanished. Nothing came back. 3 days after the text, a letter arrived. Heavy stock, formal letterhead, the Sudbury Trades and Community Foundation. I knew the name. I'd sent them a check every year for nearly a decade, never more than I could afford. The letter was signed by a woman named Maureen Gallagher, who chaired their awards committee, and she'd written it by hand, which made me read it carefully. She wanted to give me something, an award at their annual dinner in 3 weeks, for what she called 22 years of quiet and sustained contribution to trades education and youth opportunity in the Sudbury Basin. I had to read that twice too. What I'd done wasn't complicated. When a kid came through the union asking about apprenticeships and his family had nothing to back him, I'd helped. Sometimes it was a few $100s for tools. Sometimes it was a year's fees. Over time, I'd set up a small bursary through the foundation, never gave it a name and asked them not to either. I'd rebuilt a fire station's community room in Chelmsford, one summer with 3 guys I trusted, on our own time, materials paid out of our own pockets. When the United Church in Capriol called me about black mold from a roof leak, I fixed it and didn't send an invoice. I never talked about any of it. It wasn't shyness exactly. It was that once you say a thing out loud, it starts being about you instead of about the thing you did. I folded the letter back into its envelope and put it in the kitchen drawer, the one with the takeout menus and the spare batteries. I didn't call my daughter to tell her. Why would I? She'd made clear there was no seat for me at her table. There was certainly no room for this. But I stood at that drawer a moment, and something settled differently in my chest. For years, I'd measured myself by whether my children still needed me. That letter reminded me there was a whole community that had never stopped seeing me. That evening, I called my brother. He teaches welding at NSCC in Truro. Moved to Nova Scotia 20 years ago, never left. He picked up on the second ring. Everything okay? I told him about the text. I kept my voice flat. I'm always too flat. He didn't say anything soft. That's not his way, he said. Book a flight, Dennis. Come here for Thanksgiving. You're not spending it alone in that house. You've got your own thing going, I said. You are my thing, you stubborn man. Book the flight. So I did. Right there at the kitchen table, laptop open, my brother on speaker, walking me through the Air Canada site, because I always buy the wrong ticket type. Halifax, direct, leaving the day before Thanksgiving. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I chose something for myself. Not out of spite, just out of tiredness. I was tired of waiting at doors that wouldn't open, when there was someone in Nova Scotia who'd leave his unlocked all night. I closed the laptop. My brother said he'd have the kettle on. I felt lighter than I had in months. I also felt a small pull at the back of my mind, like I'd forgotten something on the stove. I had a flight. What I hadn't reckoned with was the night before I'd leave, and what that letter in the drawer would set in motion. I want to pause here for just a moment, because this next part still catches in my throat. If you've ever sat in a quiet house knowing the family you built has left a version of you behind without quite saying so, then you already understand what I was carrying. Do me one thing before I go on. Tap that subscribe button so stories like this one don't stay invisible. And tell me down in the comments. Have you ever had to choose your own dignity over a seat at someone's table? I'll read every reply. Now let me take you into that dinner. I almost didn't go. I called Maureen to decline. I had a flight in the morning, I said. She did not accept that. The dinner is tonight, Dennis. Your flight is tomorrow. You have no excuse. She sounded like a woman who had run out of patience for modest men and had been running out of it for years. I thought about my grandson. He'd called me 2 weeks earlier on an old tablet he'd found, faced too close to the camera the way kids always hold a camera. Grandpa, are you coming for the hockey tournament? I'd been turned away from their driveway twice that month with soft excuses. Not this time, bud. His face fell. You promised the lake skating. I know. You pinky promised, and I keep those. A pause, then his voice dropped to something careful. Grandpa, why doesn't Dad want you to come over? My chest went tight as ice. What makes you ask that, Emmett? I heard him on the phone. He said you make things complicated. Make things complicated. An 11-year-old carrying that phrase around in his hockey bag. I looked at the suit hanging on my closet door. It had been out once in 4 years at my daughter's wedding. Dust on the shoulder. I brushed it off. All right, I told Maureen, I'll come. Sudbury's community hall was full. Folding chairs, long tables, the smell of perogies and drip coffee. The union rep spoke first, then Maureen. She talked about the bursary, said it had sent 19 young people into trades apprenticeships who would not otherwise have gotten there. She talked about Chelmsford, about Capriol, about a young man who'd called her 2 weeks ago, and told her he'd just finished his journeyman papers, and the reason he'd been able to start was a check from a Sudbury electrician who'd asked him to pay it forward when he was on his feet. I sat with my hands folded on the table and my ears burning. Then a man across the room stood up. I didn't recognize him. He introduced himself as Alec Beaumont. He ran a property development group out of Toronto and had been in Sudbury that week scoping a project. He said his firm had mentored through 3 of the young people I'd backed. He said he'd spent the last hour asking around trying to figure out who I was and why he'd never heard of me. When Maureen called me up, the room stood. Tradespeople, mostly, some business folks. A few I'd known 20 years, some I'd never met. Close to 200 on their feet, clapping for a man in a dusty suit who fixes wiring for a living. I'm not built for rooms. I build things because it means I don't have to stand in front of rooms. Alec Beaumont found me at the coffee after. Easy conversation, the way it is with people who actually work. He asked about my life, about my family, and I mentioned offhand that my son-in-law was a commercial real estate partner in Ottawa. I named the firm. Something moved across Alex's face, not dramatically, just a small recalibration. The look of a man fitting two pieces together that he hadn't known belonged to the same puzzle. That's interesting, he said slowly, because they've been pitching me for 6 months on a Sudbury development. And in 6 months, not once did anyone from that firm mention that their partner's father-in-law built half of this community's infrastructure. A pause. If I were a consultant and my father-in-law was the man this entire room just stood up for, I'd have led with that. On day one. He looked at me steadily. Why do you think he didn't? I didn't have an answer. I held my coffee cup and turned it over. That tells me something about his judgment, Alex said not unkindly. He shook my hand and went back into the crowd. I stood there a long time after. For 5 years, my son-in-law had been very careful about what he let into the frame. He'd worked to keep me at the edge of the picture. Quiet, managed, easy to miss. It had never once occurred to him that the frame might widen on its own in a community hall in Sudbury over bad drip coffee with 200 witnesses. It just had. I didn't plan it. I want you to understand that. I never made a phone call, never posted a single thing, never said one word against my son-in-law to anyone. I just stood up in a room full of people who wanted to thank me and let myself be seen for once in a very long time. And the truth took care of everything else entirely on its own. The next evening I caught my flight to Halifax. I turned my phone off at the gate, not silent, off, black screen. I wanted the quiet. I turned it back on somewhere over New Brunswick. It found a signal, then it started. Buzz, buzz, buzz. Missed call, missed call, missed call. I watched the number stack. 11. 11 missed calls from my daughter, the same daughter who 10 days earlier had sent me 9 words telling me there was no room for me at her table. One text beneath them. Dad, please call me when you land. I'm so sorry, I didn't know. I didn't know any of it. I set the phone on my knee. The man beside me was asleep. Outside, the Maritimes were somewhere below in the dark. I want to be honest with you, because you've stayed with me this long. Some part of me, some small tired part that had driven 4 hours to be turned around in a driveway, that had been cropped out of Christmas cards, that had sent emails to a grandson through a tablet that someone else controlled, that part felt it. You know the feeling. I won't dress it up. But it passed quickly, because underneath that number was still my daughter, and she was somewhere down there hurting. I landed in Halifax. My brother was waiting past the barrier in a flannel shirt and work boots, looking exactly like himself. He wrapped me up before I could say anything useful. You came. You told me to. I called my daughter before we even got to the car. She answered before the second ring. Dad. Her voice broke on the one word. I'm here, I said. Talk to me. It came out in pieces. Alec Beaumont had called her husband's firm that morning and pulled his project consideration. He'd been brief and professional about it, which had somehow made it worse. Then, overnight, photos from the foundation dinner had gone up on the union's community page. Maureen had tagged the foundation had shared it, and by morning, it had spread through every corner of the Sudbury trades community and reached halfway down the 401 to Ottawa. Former apprentices, parents of kid helped, the church in Capriole. Your dad rebuilt our roof and told the pastor not to say his name. Wait, the Sudbury bursary? That was Dennis Hartley the whole time? I went to his daughter's wedding. I had no idea. My daughter had woken up to her phone, full of messages from people in a world she'd moved away from, telling her about a father she'd let someone quietly teach her to be embarrassed by. Why didn't you ever tell me, she said, crying hard now. Because it wasn't yours to be impressed by, I said. I didn't do it to be seen. Silence. Then, I've been so small, Dad. I let him make me small, and then I let him make you smaller, and I didn't even see it happening. A long breath. He wrote that Thanksgiving text. I had something different typed out, something softer with an actual apology in it. He changed it. He said I was over-explaining. He said keep it clean. He handed the phone back and I sent his words. And then I couldn't sleep for 3 nights. I knew. I had suspected for a while. He's not in the house right now, she said. I asked him to go to his brother's. After I saw the photos last night, everything just clicked into place. 6 years of small things. I looked at Emmett asleep and I thought, what am I teaching him? That this is what a family looks like? I let that sit without rushing past it. There's one thing I need, I said finally. Anything, Dad? Ask me. Emmett. Just the name. My voice nearly went on it. I want to be his grandfather without anyone's permission. No visits that get cancelled for a cold that isn't real. I want to keep the promises I made to that boy. That's the condition. Yes. She said it without pause. God, yes. He's been asking for you every day since he found out you weren't coming for Thanksgiving. He found out from a classmate whose father saw the dinner photos. He came home and said his grandpa was famous and wanted to know why you weren't at the table. 11 years old, carrying that. He wants to talk to you, she said. I heard the phone change hands, small breathing. Grandpa? Hey, bud. Grandpa, are you really in Nova Scotia? He said it carefully, like he'd been practicing the name. Just landed. Did you see the ocean yet? I'm still in the airport. I'll see it tomorrow. A pause, then hushed and serious. Grandpa, we're still doing the lake skating, right? When the ice comes. You and me, I said. When the lake freezes solid, hot chocolate after, the real kind, not from a packet. The old skates or the good ones? The good ones. I sharpened them last week. He was quiet a second, processing. Then, in the particular voice he used for things that mattered, I kept the map you drew me. On that receipt from Canadian Tire, I keep it in my hockey bag. A receipt from Canadian Tire, folded and refolded, carried through every tournament and practice and dressing room, while adults made decisions in rooms he wasn't allowed into. I know you did, Bud, I said. And this winter, we're going to need the whole map. He laughed. That open, unguarded laugh you can't teach a child and can't fake once you've lost it. My brother was standing a few feet away with his arms crossed, watching me. When I finally pocketed the phone, he just nodded once. We drove out of Halifax through the dark, the highway cutting through spruce and granite, the kind of landscape that looks like home even when it isn't yours. My brother talked the whole way about his students, his workshop, a woman named June he wanted me to meet. That night he made a Thanksgiving dinner that was nothing like what it was supposed to be. Salt fish and biscuits and a blueberry pie from a woman down the road. And we ate at his small table with the radio on low, and it was warmer than any holiday I'd had in years. He raised his glass to the man who finally figured out he was allowed to show up for himself. I couldn't speak, I just lifted mine. Later, doing dishes, he bumped my shoulder with his. You know what, Dennis? Some tables always had your name on them. You just kept eating at the ones that didn't. I laughed, because it was true, and because the alternative was weeping into the dishwater. And I am not a man who does that on a Wednesday in November. My son-in-law didn't come back to the house. That's not quite the full story. He and my daughter spent months in a quiet, difficult process of figuring out what their marriage was and wasn't, and eventually they figured out it wasn't enough to keep going. I won't say I'm glad about how any of it landed. I'm not. But I'll tell you this, my daughter, a year later, sounds like herself again. She thinks out loud now. She disagrees with people without apologizing for it first. She called me last month to ask my opinion about something. Just asked, directly, no lead up, and I sat there holding the phone, realizing I couldn't remember the last time she'd done that. As for my son-in-law's business, I'm told Alec Beaumont's decision wasn't dramatic, just a quiet shift. An email about a change in direction. But in those circles, word travels, and the word that traveled was this. There's a consultant in Ottawa who hid a decorated father-in-law because he wasn't polished enough for his table. In an industry built entirely on the management of appearances, that's a particular kind of crack that doesn't fill. I didn't celebrate it. I took no calls, sent no messages, said nothing to anyone. I was in Nova Scotia and then back in Sudbury, being a father again to one son and a grandfather again to one boy, and I didn't have room in me for anything else. My grandson and I skated the lake in February. -23, the ice perfect and gray-blue in the morning light. I brought the good skates and a thermos of the real cocoa, cream, not milk, a little vanilla, the way his grandmother used to make it. We skated until my ankles ached and his cheeks were as red as stop signs, and then we sat on the snowbank and drank from the thermos. And he told me everything that had happened since September, which was a very great deal, and I listened to all of it. He'd brought the Canadian Tire receipt, showed it to me like evidence. You drew the whole lake, he said. I know the lake. We should do it every year, dead serious, a tradition. Every winter, I said, pinky promise. He held out his mitten. Here's what I want you to take from all this. I'm not standing here pretending to be wise. I learned this the slow, expensive, late way. Maybe you don't have to. You do not have to make yourself small to be loved. I thought for years that if I never pushed, never asked for anything, never took up room, they'd have no reason to leave. I had it exactly backwards. The quieter I made myself, the easier I became to erase. Not because anyone was monstrous about it, just because people fill the space you leave them, and my son-in-law left nothing, so I disappeared from it, inch by inch, one reasonable sentence at a time. The moment I stopped disappearing, the truth did the rest, on its own, without me lifting a finger against anyone. If someone makes you feel like a guest in the family you built, believe what they're showing you. Then go find the table where your absence would be felt. I promise you it exists. Mine was in a community hall in Sudbury and a kitchen in Halifax, and I almost didn't get to either one of them. Dignity doesn't make speeches, it doesn't win arguments or land blows. Sometimes it's just a man on a plane with his phone turned off, finally going somewhere he's actually wanted. Last thing, a few months after all of this, a card arrived from my daughter. A photo of a kitchen chair pulled away from the table, and 3 words printed underneath. "Your seat, Dad." I texted back the only thing there was to say. On my way. And this time, when I walked through that door, nobody had to make room for me. I already had it. I just had to stop being the one who kept giving it away.